Welcome to one of the darkest and most unsettling stories in American logging history. Before we dive in, drop a comment sharing where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. We'd love to see how far these old tales still travel. The events took place deep in the northern Wisconsin wilderness, where the Black River winds through miles of frozen pine forest. According to records from the Chippewa County Historical Society, 19 men tried to cross the river on March 17, 1891. 6 hours later, only 6 came back. What happened out there would leave a permanent scar on the logging industry and cast a shadow over the nearby town of Weyerhaeuw that still lingers today. The winter of 1890-91 was brutal. Temperatures dropped to 40 degrees and stayed there for weeks. Snow buried everything, piling 6 feet high in some places by the end of January. For logging companies, it was both a blessing and a curse. The frozen ground made hauling timber easier, but the cold and isolation pushed men to their limits. Holberg Timber Company had set up Camp 27 about 17 miles northwest of Weyerhaeuw 2 years earlier. The camp was simple: one long bunkhouse, a mess hall, and a small foreman's office. Company records from the Wisconsin Historical Society show that 37 men stayed there that winter, mostly immigrants from Sweden, Norway, Germany, and Ireland, all hoping to earn enough money to buy land or send back home. The foreman, Augustus Holberg, was the younger brother of the company's owner, known for being strict, tall, and imposing, with a scar from his eye to his jaw. Workers later recalled that he demanded total obedience. One logger said, "The men feared Holberg more than the saws or the winter." What makes the Camp 27 tragedy so haunting is how ordinary things seemed before it happened. The camp's ledger shows nothing unusual, just routine notes about supplies, production, and minor injuries. The final entry on March 16, 1891, simply read, "Clear weather, 2060 river, rising with spring thaw, cutting to conclude at Northridge tomorrow." The next morning, Holberg handpicked 19 men to cross the river. One of those who stayed behind, a logger named Franz Mueller, wrote to his wife in Milwaukee a week later. Holberg came through before dawn, pointing at men in their bunks. You not, you. You. No reason given. I was not chosen. At first I was grateful. Now I'm not so sure. Their goal was to reach an untouched stand of old-growth white pine about 4 miles across the river. Company papers show that the area had been bought months earlier, but left uncut because it was too hard to reach. With spring thaw coming, it was their last chance. The most detailed report of what happened comes from the Chippewa Herald. On March 22, 1891, 6 men emerged from the forest Wednesday evening, incoherent and frostbitten. 13 of their companions are missing. The survivors, Olaf Lindstrom, Jeremiah Collins, Carl Schaefer, Peter Anderson, Mel Baranov, and Augustus Holberg, each told different stories. Lindstrom, a Swedish immigrant, claimed they tried to cross on a raft made from logs, but it broke apart in the current. "Men went under," he said. "I heard screaming, then nothing." When asked how he survived, he whispered, "I swam. I just swam." Yet the medical examiner noted his clothes were dry and his body showed no signs of hypothermia. When confronted, he said, "I swam through it, not in it." Jeremiah Collins told a completely different story. He said they never reached the river, that something in the woods called to them, using familiar voices. Jensen went first, then Mueller. They walked into the mist and didn't come back. Collins grew hysterical during questioning and was later sent to the northern Wisconsin Hospital for the Insane. There he refused to sleep, claiming they come for you in the dark, tapping on the windows. He died 4 months later, reportedly by starvation. Carl Schaefer's account was even more disturbing, and it would only deepen the mystery of what really happened to the men of Camp 27. Karl Schaefer, a German immigrant who had joined Camp 27 just 2 months earlier, was found with deep cuts across his hands and forearms. Wounds he refused to explain. Sheriff Patterson noted that during questioning, Schaefer spoke in a flat, distant voice, saying, "Holberg knew. He always knew. That's why he picked who would go. He needed 13 of us. For them. Betrayed." When pressed to clarify, he began clawing at the table until his fingers bled, repeating, "The trees were not trees." According to Dr. Anderson's report, Schaefer had carved crude tree-like shapes into his own flesh, running from wrist to elbow on both arms. When asked why, he only replied, "I needed to know what was inside." Peter Anderson's statement at first supported Olaf Lindstrom's version of a failed river crossing, but his details quickly fell apart. He claimed to have been at the back of the raft when it broke apart, yet couldn't describe how the raft was built or how many men were aboard. When asked to name who had drowned, he listed several men who hadn't even been part of the expedition. Stranger still, Anderson insisted the accident happened at sunset, though everyone else said the men left at dawn. When corrected, he appeared confused, saying, "It was morning when we left, but the sky turned red as we neared the river. Not like sunrise, like sunset. Like the day was ending instead of beginning." Mikhail Baranov, a Russian logger who had worked in timber before emigrating, gave what seemed to be the most reasonable account. He described the crew constructing a raft of 15 pine logs tied together with rope fitted with a rough steering pole. According to him, the raft began to splinter halfway across the rising Black River, throwing most of the men into the freezing current. Baranov said he clung to a broken section of log and drifted to shore, where he saw Holberg, Lindstrom, and Schaefer also make it across. When asked about Collins and Anderson, Baranov hesitated, then said they must have crossed elsewhere. Sheriff Patterson described Baranov as calm and sincere, though Dr. Anderson's examination once again raised doubts. The doctor wrote that Baranov showed no signs of having been in cold water. Instead, both his palms bore perfectly circular burns, about an inch wide. When asked about them, Baranov acted as if he didn't know they were there. Foreman Augustus Holberg, the man who had chosen the crew, refused to speak at all. Patterson's notes describe him sitting motionless, staring at the wall, seemingly aware but unresponsive. Dr. Anderson found him physically healthy, but mentally vacant, calling it catatonic withdrawal. In his pockets were 24 white pine needles, each carefully bound with thread and arranged in small patterns. The search party that set out on March 23rd found nothing. They followed the men's trail to the Black River High, but still crossable, and found no sign of a raft, no tools, no footprints, not even a scrap of clothing. "It is as if 13 men simply vanished from the earth," Patterson wrote. When they crossed to the far side, they found the stand of untouched white pine that the loggers had been sent to harvest. The trees stood perfectly still, untouched, the soil beneath dry enough to preserve tracks, but there were none. Deputy Michael Collins, who helped lead the search, noted that the area was eerily quiet. "No birds, no small game," he wrote. Dogs refused to enter, snapping and whining when urged forward. The men refused to go deeper, and worsening weather forced them to turn back. The mystery only grew darker 2 days later. On March 25, 1891, Augustus Holberg was found dead in his room at the Verhauser Hotel. The coroner ruled it a suicide by hanging, but investigators found several details that didn't add up. The beam from which he hung shouldn't have been strong enough to hold his weight. His hands were clenched so tightly that his nails had pierced his palms, drawing blood. Inside his room, authorities discovered a small journal filled with strange, disturbing sketches and unreadable writing. The journal, photographed for the case file, but later lost in a courthouse fire in 1903, reportedly contained drawings of distorted human shapes, figures with stretched limbs, and faces that looked more like bark than flesh. Witnesses said many pages were filled with the same phrase written again and again in different handwriting. The forest claims its own. The final page contained a hand-drawn map of the Camp 27 area with 13 X marks arranged in a perfect circle around the white pine grove across the river. Within a week of Holberg's death, the surviving men had all disappeared. Records show that Olaf Lindström bought a train ticket to Minneapolis on March 28, 1891, but he never arrived. His luggage was later found abandoned at the station, the last known trace of any man who walked out of Camp 27 alive. The abandoned luggage contained only a few clothes and a small cloth pouch packed with pine needles. Not long after, on April 2, 1891, Carl Schaefer was arrested in Eau Claire after attempting to burn down a boarding house. He was found in the basement, surrounded by kindling, muttering, "Fire is the only thing they fear. Fire keeps them back." He was committed to the Northern Wisconsin Hospital, placed in the same ward as Jeremiah Collins, though staff noted that the two men never spoke or even seemed aware of each other. Schaefer's file described increasingly bizarre behavior. On April 17th, an attendant found him standing motionless at his window for 6 hours, staring into the tree line beyond the hospital grounds. On May 3rd, he was discovered on the floor, trying to dig through the wooden boards with his bare hands. By May 29th, a night nurse reported hearing him whispering to something unseen, asking, "How many more do you need?" Peter Anderson and Mikhail Baranov reportedly left together on March 30th, telling their landlady they were going back to Camp 27 to collect their wages and belongings. A lumberman named Thomas Gunderson said he saw them on the road about 5 miles outside town that afternoon. Both looked anxious and kept glancing behind them. As they parted ways, Gunderson recalled Baranov saying, "If we're not back by nightfall, we were never meant to return." Neither man was seen again. Sheriff Patterson led another search on April 3rd, but found nothing. The only oddity was that although Camp 27 had been abandoned for over 2 weeks, the stove in the mess hall was still warm. No footprints, no new tracks, no sign of anyone having been there. The official investigation closed on April 10th, 1891. In his final report, Sheriff Patterson concluded that the 13 missing loggers had drowned attempting to cross the river, and that the survivors' strange accounts were the product of trauma and exhaustion. Yet a private letter discovered decades later tells a different story. Writing to District Attorney Hawkins Patterson, confessed, "I have filed my report as expected, but between us I am deeply troubled. In 23 years of law enforcement, I have never encountered anything like this. The inconsistencies cannot be reconciled. The evidence denies every account, and I cannot shake the feeling that something unearthly happened in those woods." Holberg Timber Company shut down Camp 27 immediately. The valuable white pine across the river was never touched. A note dated April 15, 1891, shows that company owner Heinrich Holberg ordered the camp permanently abandoned equipment, and all a strange move given the cost of the tools and supplies left behind. The company folded within 2 years, profits collapsing after the incident. For decades, the story of Camp 27 faded into a half-forgotten local legend, until 1937, when WPA field worker Harold Meyer began recording oral histories in Chippewa County. The elderly residents he interviewed described a deep-rooted superstition about the area. Loggers refused to work within 5 miles of the old camp, and early 1900s maps show a blank patch of forest where operations avoided. People spoke of phantom axe blows echoing through the trees on winter nights, and of a belief that 13 trees in the forest held the spirits of the lost men trees that were said to bleed when cut. One interviewee, Jacob Lindgren, a retired cook, told of a French-Canadian logger named Bouchard, who got lost while hunting in 1897 and stumbled upon the remains of Camp 27. The bunkhouse, he said, looked untouched, as if the men had just stepped outside. Inside, he saw movement, but when he opened the door, the room was empty except for 13 pairs of boots arranged neatly in a circle on the floor. Bouchard fled and never logged again. Another account came from Margaret Wilson, who ran a boarding house in Weyerhaeuser from 1894 to 1920. We had an unspoken rule, she told Meyer, never rent to men coming from the direction of the old camp. There were stories of strangers showing up speaking nonsense, their clothes reeking of pine sap, though it was spring or summer. They'd stay one night, leave before dawn, and every plant in their room would be dead by morning. But perhaps the most haunting testimony came from William Hayes, a retired deputy who had joined the original 1891 search. Though old and frail by 1937, his memory of that winter remained vivid. We found something out there that never made it into the report, he told Meyer. About a mile past the river near the White Pines was a clearing perfectly round 30 feet wide. No snow, just bare earth. In the center lay 13 sets of work clothes laid out as if the men had vanished right out of them. Hayes said Sheriff Patterson ordered the men to stay silent and mark nothing on their maps. When Meyer asked why it had been left out of the official record, the old deputy lowered his voice, even though they were alone, and whispered, "Because some things aren't meant to be written down." 3 days later, when the search party returned with more men to collect evidence, everything was gone. The clearing, the clothes, even the marked trees they'd used to find their way back, all of it had vanished. In its place were 13 young saplings, planted in a perfect circle, impossibly large for trees that could only have been there for 72 hours. Decades later, in 1952, University of Wisconsin anthropologist Dr. Eleanor Katz conducted a study of lumber folklore titled Narratives of Fear in Wisconsin Logging Communities. Though never published, her manuscript includes interviews that shed chilling light on the Camp 27 legend. One was with Elizabeth Miller, daughter of Franz Miller, the logger who'd stayed behind when Augustus Holberg chose his 19 men. Father never spoke of what happened, Elizabeth recalled, but he refused to allow wood inside our home. He built everything from brick and metal. When I asked him why, he said, "Some trees remember what they've seen." Another interview came from Ida Schaefer, niece of Carl Schaefer, who visited her uncle regularly until his death in 1893. Uncle Carl spent hours sketching the same picture, she said. A ring of trees with faces in their bark. Once, when he was clear-headed, he told me, "They made a bargain, 13 men for 13 trees. But the forest is greedy. It'll want more someday." The mystery of Camp 27 might have remained buried in old legends, if not for historian Thomas Blackwood. In 1968, Blackwood, a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, launched an expedition to locate the actual site. Obsessed with the case, after discovering Sheriff Patterson's private letters, he assembled a small team: graduate student, Rebecca Chen, photographer Daniel Morrison, and local Ojibwe guide Samuel Whitefeather, whose grandfather had worked as a logger near the site. Their field journals, photographs, and audio recordings preserved in the university archives document the entire journey. On March 15, 1968, the group departed from Weyerhaeuser, following old company maps and logging records. The next day, they found the remnants of Camp 27, 3 stone foundations matching descriptions from 1891. One long structure for the bunkhouse, 1 square for the mess hall, and a smaller one believed to be the foreman's office. Despite nearly 80 years of abandonment, the site was unusually intact. Moss-covered foundations were visible, but the forest had not reclaimed the area as expected. Morrison's photographs captured a circular stone well about 4 feet wide. Its depth was impossible to gauge, even with bright flash photography. That night, a tape recording picked up the team discussing it. Blackwood. Strange that the well hasn't filled in after all this time. Whitefeather. Maybe it has. Maybe what you're seeing isn't the bottom. Blackwood. What do you mean? Whitefeather. My grandfather said the Holberg well had no bottom. One man dropped his watch down there. They lowered a lantern on 200 feet of rope and never saw it hit water. He said the well was drinking from the other side. On March 17th, exactly 77 years after the loggers vanished, Blackwood's notes took a darker turn. Reached the river. Unusual quiet. No birds, no insects. Compasses erratic. Team unsettled. Will camp overnight before crossing. That night's recording captured only the crackle of their fire and long stretches of silence until 27 minutes in came rhythmic thudding in the distance, faint at first, then sharper. Chen. Is someone out there? Morrison. Sounds like chopping. Blackwood. At this hour. Out here. Whitefeather. We should leave now. Blackwood. Sam. There's probably a logical explanation. Whitefeather. Yes, and that's exactly why we should leave. The chopping grew louder, faster. In the final 30 seconds of the recording, Whitefeather spoke rapidly in a Ojibwe, addressing something unseen. The tape ends mid-sentence. It was the last trace of the Blackwood expedition. 3 days later, when the team failed to return, police organized a search. Their camp was found intact beside the river. Tents, tools, and cameras were untouched, as if they had simply walked away. No signs of struggle, no footprints leading from the site despite the soft earth. The river was calm and easily crossable. As one search report concluded, 4 adults vanished without trace. Authorities assumed they'd drowned, though their bodies were never recovered. 5 months later, on August 23rd, a hiker named Martin Collins found a camera 10 miles downstream. It contained 23 exposures from the Blackwood team, 20.22 already known, but the final frame showed something new. It depicted the legendary white pine stand across the river, a perfect circle of towering trees surrounding a dark object in the center. Analysts couldn't agree if it was a stump, a hole, or a figure. A note found with the camera written in Blackwood's own hand on torn journal paper read, "Only. They are not trees. Run." In 1969, the U.S. Forest Service purchased the land and folded it into the Chequamegon Nicolet National Forest. Official maps labeled the area as an ecological research zone. No timber harvesting permitted. When contacted, Forest Service representatives said the restriction was for biological preservation. But off the record, a ranger offered a different explanation. We're told not to go there, especially after dark. Trails are left unmarked on purpose. Any reports from that section go straight to the regional office. Not logged, not discussed. In 1974, University botanist Dr. James Winters tried to study the restricted zone after spotting strange growth patterns in aerial photographs. His permit request was denied, but he went anyway with 2 graduate students. They vanished for 5 days. When found, they were dehydrated, disoriented, and suffering severe shock. In their abandoned car, police found a voice recorder. On it, Winters says, March 19th, 6:42 p.m. We found the circle. The trees match Blackwood's description, enormous white pines at least 3 centuries old, arranged in a perfect ring 30 meters across. Jonas is taking samples. Ellen is photographing. Something strange about the bark. Patterns look almost like the tape cuts off in mid-sentence, replaced by a deep rumbling and heavy impacts. The 3 researchers could never explain what they'd seen. None ever returned to the forest. None of the 3 researchers could remember what happened after they entered the forest. All resigned from the university within 6 months, refusing to speak publicly about the incident. But the mystery didn't end there. In 1963, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources had already conducted an aerial survey of the Chequamegon Nicolet National Forest, mapping its tree distribution. Among the photographs later archived at the University of Wisconsin-Madison was one image showing an impossible formation near the site of old Camp 27, a perfect circle of white pines a mile across. Forestry experts have never been able to explain it. What really happened to the 13 loggers who vanished in March 1891? The official claim, a tragic river crossing gone wrong, feels increasingly hollow when weighed against the evidence. There were no bodies, no wreckage, and the survivors' stories contradicted one another in ways that made no rational sense. Then, 77 years later, 4 more people disappeared in the same place. The final piece of the mystery surfaced decades later, and it came from one of the original survivors. Records show that after vanishing from Weyerhaeuser in 1891, the Russian logger Mikhail Baranov resurfaced in Minneapolis 2 years later. He lived quietly for the next 2 decades, working odd jobs and keeping to himself. When he died in 1912, the Minneapolis Tribune published a short article titled "Local Man's Strange Passing." According to the story, Baranov's landlady found his room covered in carvings and resin. The walls were lined with small wooden figures, 19 in total. 13 had no faces. 6 were carved in intricate detail. One figure matched Baranov's own likeness, its eyes closed. Another showed Augustus Holberg with a noose around his neck. The floorboards had been pried up, revealing a pit filled with pine needles. Beneath them lay a journal written in Russian, later translated in 1957 by Professor Alexei Komarov of the University of Minnesota. The journal began clearly recounting the events at Camp 27. Baranov wrote, "Holberg knew what waited across the river. He made a bargain that autumn when he surveyed the timber. 13 trees for 13 men, that was the exchange. He didn't tell us. He only chose who would stay and who would be taken." From there, the account darkened. Baranov described how the men successfully crossed the river and reached the white pine grove by mid-morning. The trees stood in a perfect circle, taller and older than any he had seen. As they prepared to work, Holberg stopped them. "Not yet," he said. "It must be noon when the sun is high." When noon came, the forest fell completely silent. Baranov wrote of feeling an immense pressure, as though the air itself had weight, followed by a sound like creaking wood but shaped into words. Then one by one the 13 chosen men walked into the circle without a word, their eyes vacant. The last coherent line in the journal reads, "I hear them at night, not just the 13, but others. They whisper from inside the walls, from inside the wood. They tell me the forest is hungry. They tell me 13 was not enough." After that, the writing fractured into sketches, human figures with bark for skin and trees with hollow faces. The final page contained one chilling sentence in English. "They are not trees. They have never been trees." To this day, people who venture near the site describe an unnatural stillness. No birds, no insects, not even wind through the branches. Rangers have quietly confirmed that animals avoid the area. One speaking anonymously said, "We don't go there at night. Not since '86, when 2 of our guys vanished during patrol. Their truck was found with the engine running and a tape recorder on the seat. The tape was nothing but static and what sounded like someone chopping wood." In 1991, the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire planned a centennial expedition to document the Camp 27 site. It was canceled a week before departure. Officially, the reason was budget cuts. But internal memos later obtained through a Freedom of Information request revealed that the university had received an anonymous envelope containing a single pine needle and a note that read simply, "The forest remembers." Today, local resident Thomas Gunderson, grandson of the lumberman who last saw Baranov alive, maintains a small logging museum in Weyerhaeuser, Among its exhibits are artifacts said to come from the Camp 27 area, including a rusted axe head half fused into petrified wood. When asked about the legend, Gunderson said, "Something happened out there that no one can explain. The drowning story doesn't hold up. People still avoid that part of the forest. Animals won't go near it. And every few decades someone disappears again." One display in his museum is especially unsettling. A sealed glass jar filled with amber-colored pine sap collected in 1967. "My father found it," Gunderson explained. Said he watched it flowing upward against gravity. The scientists said it was impossible, but look at it long enough, you'll see it move on its own. In 1992, paranormal researcher Dr. Marion Blackwell published Whispering Pines: Unexplained Disappearances in American Forests, dedicating an entire chapter to the Camp 27 tragedy. Her findings revealed a disturbing pattern every 13 years since 1891. Someone has vanished near the old camp, always in March. Blackwell's list is chilling. 1904 Game Warden Frederick Johnson, 1917 Hunter William Stroberg, 1930 botanist Dr. Henry Wilson and assistant Thomas Green, 1943 three timber surveyors, 1956 photographer Elaine Montgomery, 1969 the Blackwood Expedition, 1982 hiker James Peterson, 1995 activist Sarah Coleman, 2008 historian Michael Davis. As Blackwell wrote in her closing paragraph, "The pattern is undeniable. Whatever lives in those woods has been taking people for over a century, 13 after 13, always in March, always near the circle of trees. Whatever it is, it's still there, and it's still hungry." The most scientific attempt to understand the Camp 27 phenomenon came in 1997 when dendrochronologist Dr. Rebecca Chen, ironically, the same Rebecca Chen who vanished with the Blackwood Expedition in 1968, before being found wandering days later, returned to the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest to study its tree growth patterns. Despite her traumatic past, or perhaps because of it, Chen had dedicated her career to investigating abnormal arboreal behavior. With special permission from the Forest Service and escorted by armed rangers, she collected core samples from trees surrounding the restricted zone. Her findings published in the Journal of Arboreal Studies revealed something deeply unsettling. The white pines near the old Camp 27 site showed periodic surges in growth roughly every 13 years, each spike occurring shortly after a documented disappearance. Chen wrote that this suggested a recurring release of nutrients into the soil, a pattern usually associated with forest fires or mass die-offs. Yet no such events had ever occurred in that area. In her private notes found after her death in 2016, Chen was far less cautious. "The trees are feeding," she wrote. "The pattern is unmistakable. Every 13 years they take what they need and they grow. The Forest Service knows. That's why the area is closed. They've made the same bargain Holberg made: sacrifice a few to protect the many. But the circle is widening. My measurements show nearly 2 miles of expansion since the first aerial surveys. At this rate, it will reach Weyerhaeuser within 50 years. The mystery deepened again in 2021 when workers renovating a historic home in Eau Claire discovered a hidden diary belonging to Dr. Thomas Anderson, the physician who had examined the 6 surviving loggers in 1891. The diary had been concealed behind a brick in the chimney for over a century and offered chilling insight into Anderson's private doubts. On March 24, 1891, Anderson wrote, "I cannot reconcile what I observed with what the men described. Their bodies bore no evidence of immersion, no frostbite, no exposure. Yet all 6 emitted the same odor, sweet and foul like sap mixed with decay." He described finding an unusual residue on Holberg's clothing, a sticky substance containing fibers that writhe when exposed to heat. He preserved a sample, though he admitted it filled him with dread. On April 17th, his final entry on the subject read, "I visited the site. The camp stands abandoned, but not empty. I saw the circle of pines in the distance, but dared not approach. Fresh tracks led toward the river, human at first glance, but wrong somehow. I resolved to destroy the sample, but when I held it to the flame, I heard what sounded like screaming. I could not do it. I sealed it in a vial instead. May God forgive me." When Anderson's home was excavated, no such vial was found. Inside his medical cabinet, however, was a small compartment containing a perfect circle of dried pine needles, surrounding an indentation in the wood just large enough for a vial to have rested there once. Today, the town of Verhauser carries an uneasy truce with its haunted past. Some residents, like local historian Thomas Gunderson, preserve the legend through small museum exhibits. Others pretend it never happened. The Chamber of Commerce brochures celebrate lumber heritage and outdoor recreation, but make no mention of Camp 27. Yet the story persists in whispers. Margaret Wilson, a lifelong resident and elementary teacher, explained, "Every kid here grows up hearing it. Don't go into the North Woods or the trees will get you. It's our version of the boogeyman." The adults try to downplay it, but whenever someone goes missing near those woods, and it still happens, the stories come back. Dr. James Patterson, a folklorist at the University of Minnesota, no relation to Sheriff Patterson, has studied the legend as an example of occupational folklore. "Logging has always been dangerous work," he said. The Camp 27 story reflects that danger. But it also touches something older, a fear of the forest as a living, thinking presence. Across cultures, nature is often seen as capable of pushing back. The Camp 27 legend is a distinctly American version of that myth. Still, even Patterson concedes that the persistence and consistency of the evidence defy mere folklore. The ruins of the camp, the perfect circle of trees, the official records of disappearances, all point to something that can't easily be explained away. More than 130 years later, Camp 27 remains an open wound in Wisconsin's history. A place where nature itself seems to remember and to hunger. In 2017, an anonymous Forest Service employee leaked a classified report analyzing soil samples taken from the restricted zone surrounding the former Camp 27 site. The report, dated 2005, described abnormally high levels of organic compounds, consistent with decomposition and elevated iron concentrations, suggestive of blood content. Most disturbing was the discovery of microscopic cellular structures that did not fit into any known plant or animal category. The report stated these structures displayed characteristics of both plant xylem and animal nerve tissue, as if the forest itself possessed a living reactive system. The report concluded with a chilling recommendation: the restricted zone should be expanded by 3 miles and all future research requests permanently denied. A handwritten note in the margin read simply, "Containment is priority. Prevention impossible at this stage." For those who still venture into the northern Wisconsin wilderness, the area around the old Camp 27 site remains an unsettling contradiction. On official maps, it's an unremarkable patch of the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest, unmarked and inaccessible. Signs warn of environmentally sensitive habitat forbidding entry without government authorization. Locals, however, know better. As March approaches each year, hunters avoid the area. Dogs refuse to follow trails that lead toward it. Hikers speak of moments when the forest goes completely silent. No birds, no wind, only the sense of being watched. Pilots flying overhead report odd turbulence and compass malfunctions as they pass above the coordinates of the restricted zone. Whatever happened to those 13 loggers in the winter of 1891, the evidence has long contradicted the official version. No bodies were ever found. The survivors' accounts defied logic. Later disappearances in the same location, stretching across more than a century, point to an ongoing phenomenon, rather than a single tragic event. The forest has kept its secrets well, but its silence is never empty. As this story closes, we return to the final lines from Carl Schaefer's journal, discovered after his death in 1893. In handwriting that grows increasingly erratic, he wrote, "The trees watch us. They have always watched us. We cut them down by the thousands, and they remember every stroke. In the oldest parts of the forest, where no man has ever cut, they wait. And sometimes, when the conditions are right, they reach back. For those living near the Black River woods, that warning still lingers." The next time you hear the wind move through the pines, listen carefully. Is it just the wind, or something older, patient and remembering? One question still haunts every investigator who has studied the case. If 13 men were truly taken in 1891, why were 6 allowed to return? Were their broken minds and conflicting stories simply the result of trauma, or were they meant as a message? A warning from something that wanted to be known, but not understood. In March 2021, exactly 130 years after the first incident, researcher Michael Thompson set out to map the site using modern GPS equipment. He maintained hourly check-ins with colleagues at the University of Wisconsin and carried satellite gear cameras and emergency beacons. His final message came at 11:17 a.m. on March 17th. Found old logging road leading to campsite. Strange fog rolling in despite clear forecast. Will update in 30 minutes. No further contact followed. Search teams found his vehicle parked at the forest access point, his supplies untouched, suggesting a short day trip. 3 days later, his gear was discovered in a small clearing, his pack camera, GPS unit, and satellite phone all neatly arranged in a perfect circle. The camera's memory card contained dozens of ordinary photos of trees and undergrowth, ending with a series focused on a distant clearing where thin vertical shapes appeared in a ring. The final image, blurry and underexposed, shows white pines with markings on their bark that, when digitally enhanced, resemble distorted human faces. Michael Thompson was never found. For generations, the forests of northern Wisconsin have drawn those seeking timber, solitude, or truth. Most return unchanged. Some never return at all. And a few come back different. Their eyes haunted, their words fragmented, their silence louder than their screams. The Camp 27 incident may never be explained. Time has erased the evidence and taken the witnesses, but the pattern continues. The restricted zone remains in place, and every 13 years, someone vanishes. The locals have a saying carved anonymously into a bench outside the Weyerhaeuser Public Library one March night in 1943. The forest remembers. The trees are patient. And there will always be those who venture too far. So the next time you walk among ancient pines, listen closely. That rustle above you might not be wind at all. It might be something else, something alive, something waiting, something whispering your name from the heart of the woods.